Girls, today we are going to discuss on the topic ecological adaptations of hydrophytes. Okay, we have to do on hydrophytes, xerophytes, epiphytes, and halophytes. So today we will be discuss on this topic hydrophytes. So first, let us try to understand what do we mean by ecological adaptations. Now, ecological adaptation, ecology meaning the relation, right? The relationship of the living organism, living things with other living organisms, their relationship not only with other living organisms but with the environment, with the surrounding. Okay, so that is the meaning of ecology. Now adaptation meaning to adapt to to the exist condition of that surrounding where they survive, of their habitat. So as you can see here, what is the meaning of adaptation is any feature of an organism which enables it to exist on the conditions of its habitat. Okay, is called adaptation. For example, you you are adapt to the place where you stay. You are adapt to, suppose now when you go to a different place, suppose you want to go outside Meghalaya, if you have to stay there for a longer period of time, as soon as you go uh, you will not be able to adapt, but with time you will be able to adapt with the environment, with the climate which is there, and then with the food, with everything which surrounds you. So if you go anywhere, your body will try to adapt to that environmental condition. Okay, so that is adaptation. Now these adaptations, they are for withstanding adverse conditions of environment and also to utilize a maximum benefit of the environment. Okay, so like I had given you an example yourself, if you go outside, so you see here nutrition, it may be nutrition or climatic conditions or any other environmental conditions, your body will try to adapt to that place where you will stay. So you see here, it is a feature of an organism, any living organism, which enables it to exist under the condition of its habitat. Okay, where do you stay? In the place where they stay, their habitat. Now, actually, in plants, adaptations, it may be morphological, anatomical, and physiological. You can see here. Okay, ecological adaptation, it may be morphological, that means external features, okay, their body, their external features. Anatomical, meaning their internal organs, their internal structure. And physiological, characters. So let us take a look at these one by one. So the first one here, oh sorry, the fourth one also is there, that is reproductive characters, but these three are important. Okay, in ecological adaptation in plant, it may be of three types, that is morphological, anatomical, and physiological characters. So this one here, it is given the classification of plants, but we are not actually going to study in detail the classification, since it is not mentioned in your syllabus. Here I'm just going to show you so that you will understand. Now, what are hydrophytes? You know that hydrophytes, they are plants growing in or near water bodies. Okay, they are growing in water or near the water bodies in wet condition. Now xerophytes, they are plants which are adapted to survive under very poor availability of water. Okay, that is in drought condition. Now mesophytes, they are those plants which are growing in an environment which is neither very dry nor very wet, but we are not going to do this since it's not mentioned in your syllabus about mesophytes. We are not going to study mesophytes. Okay, hydrophytes, xerophytes, then we have, okay, we have halophytes also. We will talk about that in detail later. Okay, so for now let us concentrate on hydrophytes. So you see here that these hydrophytes, they are the aquatic plants or also known as the water plants. They are the plants growing in water or near water, and they are adapted to survive in excess of water in their surroundings. Now, if you take other plants and you give so much water, they will die. They will not be able to adapt to this excess of water condition. Okay, so only hydrophytes, they are adapted to survive in excess water condition. Now here you can see that it comes from the Greek word hudor, means water, and phyton, meaning plant, water plant. Okay, hydrophytes, that is water plant. Now these are some of the examples of the hydrophytes: Utricularia, Vacillinaria, then Hydrilla, Cara. This Cara you have studied, it is an algae. Then Ceratophyllum, then Trappa. All these, they are an example of hydrophytes, and these aquatic plants, they are the producers of the aquatic ecosystem. That means they fix sunlight and ensures the survival of an aquatic ecosystem. And even though plants originated in water except algae, most of the aquatic plants, they evolve from their mesophyte relatives. Remember girls, just now I had shown to you what are mesophytes: the plants which do not live in so much wet condition or so much dry condition. Okay, so they believe that these hydrophytes, they accept algae, they are also evolved from their mesophytic relatives. Okay, from these mesophyte plants only. Now you can see we have different types of hydrophytes. Okay, the first category is the free floating plants. Okay, these hydrophytes, they can float in water bodies. Okay, for example, here you can see these are the different free floating hydrophytes: Lemma, then Salvinia, Azola, Piscia, then Wolffia. These 5 different types, they fall under this category, that is the free floating plants. And we have submerged hydrophytes. Okay, these free floating, they float on the surface of water. Okay, either completely floating condition, or they are just partially submerged in water bodies. Okay, so we have free floating, that means these plants, they float completely on the surface of water. So these 5 different types, they completely float in water. Then we have submerged. Submerged, these plants, uh, they are rooted, okay, in the muddy substrata of water body, in the portion where there is mud, okay, muddy. And their leaves and flowering shoots, they float on the above surface of the water, whereas the roots, they are attached in the muddy area, muddy substrata. For example, here you can see the submerged hydrophytes: Hydrilla, then Vacillinaria, Utricularia, Cara, and Ceratophyllum. So these, they fall under the category of the submerged hydrophytes. Then we have pond plants, then marshy plants. Actually, we also have these rooted submerged hydrophyte. Now, what are rooted submerged hydrophytes? These plants, they are not in contact with the air. Okay, they remain completely submerged inside the water and are rooted in soil. Okay, so for example, these hydrilla and all, they are completely submerged in water and they are attached to the soil inside the water through their roots. So they fall under this category of rooted submerged hydrophytes. Then we have rooted emergent hydrophytes or amphibious. Okay, it's not mentioned here, but these amphibious plants, uh, amphibious hydrophytes or swarm plants, these plants, they have the ability to adapt both in aquatic and terrestrial modes of life. Just remember girls, the amphibious hydrophytes, okay, they have the ability to adapt both in aquatic as well as terrestrial modes of life, and they show variations in adaptation depending upon the habitat that they grow. And we also have submerged floating hydrophytes. This I had already mentioned. I think that these plants, they are not in contact with the air, but they grow below the water surface. Okay, and but they don't have any root. The root is not attached to the soil or the substratum inside the water body. They are free floating, but they are submerged. Whereas these rooted submerged hydrophytes, they are submerged inside the water, but they also have roots, okay, which attach to the soil inside the water bodies. Now coming to this, okay, we are not going to talk about these factors. This I had already mentioned, the floating, the submerged hydrophytes, amphibious, that I had already mentioned that these plants, they are adapted to both aquatic and terrestrial mode of life. They grow either in the shallow water or they grow in the muddy soil. Example, Oryza sativa, that is rice. You see, when you plant rice, you can see that they used to plant in the muddy soil, okay, full of water, and they are the important plant population in marshy areas. Marsh plants are those plants in which the shoot is completely exposed to air, but the roots are completely buried in the soil. Remember this, okay? The shoots are completely exposed to air, but the roots are completely buried in the soil, in the muddy soil. So next, now finally we'll come to this ecological adaptations of hydrophytes. And I had already mentioned that these hydrophytes, they show three levels of ecological adaptations, that is morphological adaptations in external features, anatomical, meaning adaptation in the internal features, and we have physiological adaptation. You can see adaptations in metabolic features. So these are the three types of adaptations in hydrophytes. We are going to discuss one by one. Okay, so let us start with the morphological adaptations, that is the external features. Okay, let us take a look at one by one. Now, the first one here is the roots. Okay, how the roots they are, what is the structure of the roots, or the morphological characters of the roots in these hydrophytes, in these water plants. Now, I had already mentioned, right, that the hydrophytes, some of the hydrophyte plants, they are fully submerged inside the water, and some they are free floating, some they have roots. Okay, the roots help the plant to attach to the substratum, that is the soil inside the water, and some they are without the roots. Okay, they float freely inside the water, they are free floating. So you can see here the roots in hydrophytes, they are poorly developed. Okay, they are not like in the terrestrial plants. They are poorly developed, or they may be reduced or completely absent. Okay, completely absent in hydrophytes, since the roots, they are not required for the absorption of water or nutrients, because these hydrophytes, the whole plant itself, it can take part in the absorption, since the leaves or the stem also is fully submerged. It is submerged in water, so the roots, they are not required for this function. Okay, actually their main function is to uh, anchorage, okay, to help the plant to attach to the substratum, to the soil. Now you can see here that the entire plant surface, they can absorb water and minerals. And also one more thing, you will see in the roots, that the roots of these hydrophytes, they lack root caps. You know that root caps, they function to protect, right, to protect the root, the delicate root tip, and also to transfer the signal, or to receive the signal from the environmental signal. Okay, so in case of hydrophytes, these root caps are usually absent, but instead of root caps, the root tips, they are often provided with root pockets or root sheath, okay, for protection. Root, it is a sheath or it's like a pocket which cover the root tips. Now you can see in this hydrophyte example here, Jassia repens, in this hydrophyte two types of roots are developed, not only a single type but two types. The first one, that is the normal roots, okay, just like in other plants, in terrestrial plants, those normal roots, they help the plant in anchorage, okay, to attach to the substratum. But it has other types of roots referred to as the floating roots. You can see here in with the arrow, the yellow arrow here is showing the spongy roots, okay, which they are spongy. Sponge, you know, when you they help in floating of the plant, okay, so that is why they are also referred to as the floating roots. And these floating roots, they are negatively geotropic. You know that in response to the in geotropism, the roots, they always, in response to the gravity of the earth, the roots always grow downwards, right? Whereas the stem and the leaves, they grow upward. But these floating roots, they are negatively geotropic, so they do not grow in response to the gravity of the earth. They do not grow downwards, and also they are spongy in structure, so their function is to help the plant to float in the water, so they do not need to grow inside, okay, in the to attach to the substratum or to grow downward, okay, so they are negatively geotropic and also help the plant in floating in the to float in the water. Now let us come to the stem. Okay, the stem in hydrophytes. Now the stem in hydrophytes, it is very delicate and is usually green in color. In most of the hydrophytes, the stem is modified into rhizomes or runner. Okay, just like in a terrestrial plant, for example, the ginger, turmeric, you have seen the rhizome, right? The rhizome is formed. So in this case also, the stem in hydrophytes is usually modified into rhizome, also referred to as runner. Actually, in submerged hydrophytes, the stem is long, slender. It is also spongy to help the plant to float, and flexible type. Okay, that allows the plant. They are flexible because they can allow they allows the plant to withstand severe water current. Okay, without damaged. So when the severe water current is there inside the water, these plants, since they are very flexible, they help prevent the plant from uh, damaging of the severe water current inside the plant. And in free floating plant, whereas in free floating the stem is short, thick. Okay, so you see in submerged hydrophyte, stem is long and slender. In free floating plants, the stem is short, thick, spongy, and makes the plant float on water surface, as well as it also helps the plant in vegetative propagation. So these are the different types of stems in hydrophytes. Now coming to the leaves. So the leaves in case of floating hydrophytes, the leaves are long, circular, green, thin, and also smooth. In these plants, the upper surface of the leaf is exposed to the air, whereas the lower surface, it touches the water. For example, if you remember in lotus plant, the petiole, it shows indefinite growth and thus always keeps the leaf floating in the water. Heterophily, meaning morphological different leaves in a single plant, is present in some plants. So in some plants, in the same plant itself, you will see different types of leaves. Okay, they are differ in their morphological characters, that is external feature of the leaf, they are different in a single plant. So these type of leaves, they are referred to as heterophily. And in this heterophyllous form, the submerged leaves, they are linear or they are ribbon like or highly dissected, whereas the floating leaves, since I said two or more different types of leaves are present, so those in the same plant, those leaves which are present inside the water, that is submerged inside the water, they are linear or ribbon like, whereas the floating leaves or the aerial leaves, which are usually their upper part is exposed to the air, they are usual or they are circular in shape. And the leaves of the free floating hydrophytes, they are with smooth waxy surface. Okay, they are covered with a wax on the upper surface, and the wax coating, it protects the leaf from chemical or any physical injuries. Okay, so that is why they are covered with wax. And the okay, so these are the different types of leaves. Okay, in hydrophytes, you see that the upper leaf surface in floating leaves, they are coated with thick wax to repel the water and also to protect the leaves from both physical and chemical injuries. So uh, these are the different types of leaves in hydrophytes. They also prevent water clogging of stomata during rainy season. And you can see an example of this hydrophyte here, that is the in Acornia. The leaves, they are with swollen and spongy petiole for providing buoyancy. Okay, so next we will come to the anatomical adaptations in hydrophytes. So like I said, in Acornia, you can see that the leaves, they are with swollen and spongy petiole. Okay, you can see in yellow arrow here, providing buoyancy. That is the ability of this plant to float in water. Okay, when submerged in water, they are able to float due to the presence of these spongy petiole. Now coming to the anatomical adaptations of hydrophytes, it shows the following characteristics. Okay, to the first one, that is reduction in protecting structures, then increase in aeration, reduction of supporting or mechanical tissues, reduction in vascular tissues, and reduction in protecting structures. The first one here, reduction in protecting structures. For example, you can see in hydrophytes the cuticle is totally absent in submerged parts of the hydrophytes, because we know that the cuticle, it helps in protection. So here in case of hydrophytic plants, this cuticle is totally absent. But in submerged parts, since you know that some of the hydrophytes, the lower part is submerged inside the water body, whereas the upper part is the aerial parts which is exposed to the air. The cuticle, it may be present, but it may be present as a very thin layer. It is not so thick. So for example, in the stem, you usually see in trees or in other terrestrial plants, you see that the cuticle is usually, or three layers, is usually very thick. Okay, but in case of these plants, because these plants, they they do not require to protection, they lack the external protective cuticle layer. You know that the terrestrial plant, they require this protective cuticular layer to limit the water loss, right? To limit the water loss. But since these hydrophytes, they are already present inside the water, their habitat is inside the water, so there is no need for this cuticle layer, because there will be no water loss. So that is why it is either totally absent, or in some hydrophytes, in the aerial part, that is the half of the part of the plant which is exposed to the air, the cuticle is present, but it is again very thin as compared to the terrestrial plants. And the epidermis here is not the protecting layer as in case of the uh, as in case of the terrestrial plants. The epidermal cells they contain the epidermal cells of the leaves and the stems they contain chlorophyll, okay, which enhance they contain chloroplast, which enhance the rate of productivity. And these epidermal cells they can also function, they can absorb water as well as nutrients. And in stem you see that the hypodermal cells or the hypodermis, it is poorly developed and the cells are thin walled. Then the second one is the increase in aeration. Now the stomata in case of hydrophytes they are completely absent in submerged parts of the hydrophytes, and sometimes vestigial stomata are present. So the exchange of gases in hydrophytes it takes place through the cell wall since the stomata are absent, and whereas in those species in those hydrophytic plants, floating plants, okay, the free floating hydrophytes, the stomata is confined only to the upper epidermis of the leaf. And the parenchyma also is well developed in submerged plants. The air chambers in the parenchyma they are filled with respiratory gases as well as moisture. So these are the increase in the aeration. Now coming to the third type of anatomical adaptation is the reduction of supporting or mechanical tissues other than vascular tissues. So mechanical tissues they are absent, they are either absent or they are poorly developed. The thick-walled sclerenchymatous cells they are totally absent again in hydrophytes. For example, here you will see in nymphia, one of the hydrophytic plant, the special type of star-shaped lignified cells known as the asteroclerites, these are present. Okay, in case of this plant, these star-shaped lignified cells they are present, and these cells they provide mechanical support to the plant, and the main function of the roots is to anchor in the soil, as I had already mentioned earlier that it is not to absorb nutrients as well as water, because the whole plant itself it can absorb function in the absorption of water and the nutrients, okay, but the function of the root is only in to help in the uh, anchorage. Yes, you can see here this is the plant nymphia, the hydrophytic plant. These are the cells which are present, the lignified cells, okay, known as the asteroclerite in nymphia. You can see the structure here. This is the microscopic structure. Now we have next anatomical adaptation, the fourth one, that is the reduction in the vascular tissues. Now as the epidermal cells they absorb water and nutrients directly from the surrounding water, so there is a very little need of vascular tissues. Hence the internal vascular tissue, especially the xylem, which transport water, is often greatly reduced, okay, and the phloem also is generally poorly developed in most plants, but in rare cases in some hydrophytic plants it may be well developed, but that is very rare. Okay, so in most of hydrophytic plants this vascular system, that is the xylem and the phloem, it is either poorly developed or it is either absent, because we know that the epidermal cells itself which are present in the plants, the epidermis layer, it is able to absorb water and nutrients directly from the surrounding water. So coming to the third type of adaptation, that is physiological adaptation of the hydrophytes, okay, so let us discuss. So girls, before we start with the third type here, that is the physiological the physiological characters or adaptation, sorry, physiological adaptation. I forgot to mention one more thing here in this morphological adaptation. Okay, we have the roots, the stem, the leaf, the third one, that is the leaf, and I forgot to mention one more, that is the reproductive structures. Okay, adaptations based on their reproductive structures. Now I'll just tell you that here I'll just mention, okay, it's not written here in this file, the reproductive structures. In case of hydrophytes, the flowers and the seeds, they are less abundant as compared to those plants, to the terrestrial plants. And these totally submerged plants, they show hydrophilous pollination, meaning the pollination, it occurs with the help of water. The pollen grains, they get transport from one plant to another with the help of water. Okay, so hydrophilous pollination, that is, they use water as a vector in transportation of pollen from one plant to the other. But in while here the another type of pollination that can be seen is entomophily. Okay, entomophily meaning the reproduction with the help of insects. It occurs in those hydrophytes which are free floating. So just remember, in those totally submerged plants where the insect cannot reach, that pollination occurs with the help of water, that is hydrophilous pollination, whereas those free floating hydrophytes, it occurs with the help of insects. Okay, so it is referred to as entomophily pollination. Now these reproduction here, in case of hydrophytes, it usually occur by vegetative propagation. Okay, vegetative propagation, that where the new plants, it grows from the fragment of the parent plant, either through fragmentation of the shoots, the stolon of set, or by winter buds. Okay, or through the buds which form in the winter, that is why they are referred to as winter buds, or through the fragmentation of shoots. The shoot will split into many fragments, and these fragments will develop into a new plant. So that is a reproduction. It usually occurs by vegetative propagation. And the fruits and the seeds, they are less abundant, and also they are very small and light in weight. That is why they can float on the surface of water, thus enabling them to disperse a long distance from one place to another. So as compared to the terrestrial plants, the fruits and the seeds, they are very small, and also they are lightweight. So that is why they can float on the surface of water and disperse through a long distance. So this reproductive structures also, it falls under this category, the morphological adaptation, sorry. And here next we have the third type, the last type of adaptation, ecological adaptation, that is physiological. Okay, physiological adaptation of hydrophytes. Now as you can see here, the first point, the low osmotic concentration of the cell sap in hydrophytes. So the osmotic concentration is equal or slightly higher to that of the surrounding. Why? This will prevent the unnecessary entry of the water into the cell. If the osmotic concentration is less, then you know that if the osmotic pressure is less, then you know that water will try to enter inside, right? So it is not less, it is either slightly higher or it is equal to the surrounding water, the osmotic pressure. That is why that water, it cannot enter unnecessarily into the cells. And water, like I said before also, that it can be absorbed by the entire plant surface and not by the roots, okay, by the leaves, the stems. That is the entire surface when it is submerged in water, even the nutrients as well. And even gaseous exchange, you have already we have already discussed the absence of stomata, right? So gaseous exchange also, it can takes place through the entire plant surface, and both the stem as well as the leaves, they can do photosynthesis. And during photosynthesis, the oxygen which is produced is not given out to the air surrounding. Okay, in fact, it is retained in the air cavities of the plant. Why? Because this oxygen will again utilize when required. And transpiration, here transpiration meaning exhalation of water vapor through the stomata. So since the stomata are absent, that means transpiration also, they are absent in case of submerged plant. Then we have the emerged plants and floating plants, they have excessive transpiration. Okay, so only those plants which float under the water surface, they have excessive transpiration. That means the exhalation of water vapor. Why? Because half of their body is inside the water uh, all throughout their life. So that excess water, they transpire through their whole surface of the plant. Okay, so they have excessive transpiration. And even the mucilage cells, they produce plenty of mucilage in case of these plants. Why? Because we know that any plant, any terrestrial plant, if you keep for a longer time inside the water, it will decay, right? So how these plants, they are able to be present inside the water throughout their lifetime? So these mucilage cells, they produce a huge amount of mucilage in order to prevent the decay of these plants in water. The mucilage or the mucilaginous substance, the gelatinous substance, okay, which prevent the decay of the plants. And vegetative reproduction, as I had already mentioned in reproductive structures, that it is the common method of reproduction. And also I had also mentioned that pollination and dispersal of fruits in the hydrophytes, they are facilitated by water only, since they are inside the water. And several anaerobic stress proteins, they are these mucilage canals and mucilage cells, they are present, and they secrete a huge amount of mucilage to protect the plant body from decay. Then we have as you know that the epidermal cells also, they are not coated with cuticle, so all the surface cells, they are able to absorb water, nutrient, and also dissolve gases directly from the surrounding water. Unlike terrestrial plants, they have thick cuticle to prevent the loss of water, the excessive loss of water from the plant. But these, since they are they lack cuticle, so the cuticle are not, or the epidermal cell are not coated with the cuticle, so the whole plant surface, it can absorb nutrients, water, as well as dissolve gas. Okay, so these are some of the important uh, adaptations, physiological adaptations of these plants, of the hydrophytic plants. And in some hydrophytes also, you will study this CAM, okay, CAM mechanism is developed to fix. This mechanism is developed in these particular plants, that is the hydrophytes, in order to fix carbon dioxide efficiently. So I'll stop here for today. We will continue with the next classes of plants, okay, the xerophytes, halophytes, in the next class.